During a 60 Minutes interview, one of the Oath Keepers, in fact, the vice president for the Oath Keepers, they're very official with their hierarchy, said that current police who are serving in the police force have worked to train these right-wing gang members. Let me give you the details from Jim Arroyo, who spoke to 60 Minutes. He says, our guys are very experienced. We have active duty law enforcement in our organization that are helping to train us. We can blend in with our law enforcement. In fact, in a lot of cases, our training is much more advanced because of our military backgrounds. And a dozen members of the Oath Keepers, of course, have been charged in connection with the riots that took place in the Capitol on January 6th. Arroyo says that he was not present during those riots and claims that he disagrees with the violence that was committed on that day. But he also says this: I want to congratulate Stuart Rhodes and his 10 militia buddies for winning first place in the ultimate dumbass contest, because that's what it is. This goes against everything we've ever taught, everything we believe in. It was pre-planned, it was pre-staged. 10 guys go and do something stupid and suddenly we're the devil. But I mean, what do the Oath Keepers stand for? This is what the Oath Keepers are all about. They're anti-government. Many of them are white nationalists. Violence is what we've seen them carry out in case after case. Why is he pretending like this is not a specific characteristic tied to the Oath Keepers?
Well, it's interesting. I had a different interpretation of that quote. I'm not positive that I'm right, but I sense that he was saying they shouldn't have pre-planned it because we're better off when we're separate cells. And it honestly reminded me of a terrorist group saying, if you pre-plan, they could then trace it back to leadership, and that could be a problem. So just make sure that you commit these things is kind of like lone wolf situations where we encourage this kind of activity, but we don't have our fingerprints on it. And they're very cognizant of law enforcement, partly because they don't want to get caught. Part of the reason that they're getting trained by cops across the country is because they want to blend in, and he explained that too. So they want to blend in with the cops. So look, I mentioned it earlier in the show. If we had a couple of black cops training new Black Panthers on how to meld in with the cops and get away with things and their anti-government stance, there would be a national movement. Fox News would talk about it every night. They'd be hunted down. Those cops would be hunted down until they found who the few bad apples were. If you did it against an oil pipeline, imagine cops teaching protesters how to circumvent the law when it comes to blocking an oil pipeline. There'd be a national manhunt for those cops working with no good left-wingers, no good African Americans, etc. That would be the mindset. We hear, cops across the country are working with Oath Keepers. Nah. You know why? Part of our assumption is, right-wingers are always right, and they actually run the country, and they should run the country, so it's not that big a deal. That's our baseline assumption as to why people's hair isn't on fire.
Well, just to give you a little more insight, in August of 2020, an FBI agent named Michael German reported on US law enforcement failing to control the right-wing terrorists in their ranks, something that we talk about quite a bit on this show. So according to his findings, law enforcement officials are increasingly tied to racist militant activities in more than a dozen states since 2000. I'm sure it dates back much, far back, further than that. His report explained that over the years, police had grown increasingly linked to militias and white supremacist groups in Alabama, California, Connecticut, Florida, Illinois, pretty much every single state, Michigan, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, Virginia, Washington, and West Virginia. But again, I would argue that states not even included in that list have very similar problems. Professor Vita Johnson authored a paper in 2019 that included a list of more than 100 police departments in 49 states that have faced scandals over racist texts, emails, or public social media posts by officers just since 2009. And guess what? They were rewarded in Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a piece of legislation indicating that if protesters are blocking the roads, if the cops or anyone else just happens to run over them, well, they have immunity now. It's totally fine. It's okay. And of course, that's a response to Black Lives Matter and the protests that have been happening as a result of police violence against the African American community.
Yeah, I gotta say here, mea culpa on how naive I was, especially when I was younger, about cops. Like if you told me that there were like tons of racist cops back when I was growing up, I would say, oh, no way. You know why? I grew up in a suburb. And so,
because the cops actually did protect and serve you.
Yeah.
You could call the cops and they would look out for you, right? And that gave you a different perspective than all the people who have been brutalized by cops in poor neighborhoods, in cities, in diverse areas of the country. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, talked to Chuy Martinez, who's a radio personality here in LA, and he said when he was growing up in a poor Latino area of Arizona, he had to keep his report card with him because every time the cops pulled him over, he had to show him he was a good student and not a criminal. He was like 12 at the time, okay? And I said, how often did you get pulled over? 2 or 3 times a week. When, how, why? Oh, we'd be playing basketball in our neighborhood next to my house, everybody up against the wall, nonstop, right? That's just considered normal in America. That we take a certain percentage of our population and we say, okay, you have a different skin tone and you're poor. Oh, we're gonna kick the crap out of you. We're gonna assume you're guilty and et cetera. And everybody else, right wingers, are gonna protect you. So I was naive. And guys, I'm asking you to open your eyes. So if you have the perspective where the cops have protected you your whole life, understand that's not the only perspective. And so it turns out that's not how they treat everybody. And millions of African Americans and Latinos in this country are not lying in unison. So we should accept no racism among our cops. Those guys have badges and they have guns. We cannot have them out there treating black people and Latinos and God knows who else with this kind of hatred and fear and all the things that spring from it. But unfortunately in America, that's considered normal.
One of our members just commented in, I think Ari is her name, about how cops will just kill people or rough people up with body cameras on. They don't care.
Because they're so used to it.
They don't care.
Because they don't think they're doing anything wrong. Because they were taught to rough people up. And they think, what, I just did the thing you told me to do. They disrespected me. So I broke a 73-year-old woman's shoulder. She had it coming. And then I told her, why'd you make me do this? That's their training. We gotta get it out, but nobody's doing a goddamn thing about it.